My name is Andrew DeMaster. Today is April 16th, 2018. The time is 5 p.m. We are at St. John's Northwestern Military Academy. I am interviewing Jack Eleyet, who was born April 9th, 1929 in Urbana, Ohio, and served in the Korean War between 1950 and 1954. Jack Eleyet was a staff sergeant in the Air Force and served as a medic. Thank you for coming for the interview today.
Thank you.
I'd like to start by talking about your before you went into the war and your life at home. So could you talk a little bit about your family and what it was like growing up?
Well, growing up, I grew up in Ohio, specifically Dayton, Ohio, which is right next door to Wright-Patterson Airfield. So during my young years, anytime anything new came up at the airport, we knew about it right away. So as a young lad, I loved airplanes. I was always sketching them. But I thought someday maybe I could be a pilot. Then along came the war, World War II, and was finishing up, 45. And by that time I was finishing up in high school. And but then when I turned 18, of course, I had the opportunity to sign up for the draft. I was given extra time because I was a full-time student that I didn't have to. I knew I wouldn't be drafted until I finished my schooling. But after 3 years, I got a notice that my deferment had run out. It's time to shape up and serve your country. So at any rate, I talked to some recruiters to get their opinion about whether I should enlist or take my chances with the draft. So I thought, since I was interested in flying, I thought, well, I joined what was going to be the United States Air Force. In the old days, or in previous days, it was known as the Army Air Corps. But now, after being involved in World War II and also in the startup of Korea, then the nation adopted U.S. Air Force. So because of that, the recruiters pointed out there could be some really advantages for you since the Air Force is a young unit. So that's why I signed up in 1950.
Talking about your interest in the Air Force and the fact that you enlisted in the Air Force yourself, did you have any past military experience or interest in your family?
I discussed with my family. I had an uncle that was served in World War II and a nephew. Also have two brothers, or excuse me, one brother that was in the Army during World War II. So we had a chance to learn what he could. But I was always looking up things in the library or checking the news. My hope was to point to a flight school. That, as we learned later, didn't happen, but so be it.
With all your interest in the Air Force itself and all this research you did, was there anything shocking about your adaptation to military life or anything you had not expected?
That's a good question. What you hear or learn beforehand doesn't tell the whole story. But of course, the military has its story, and then you learn to adapt to it. But it wasn't something that upset me. It was just something I learned to live with.
And when you were going into the Air Force, you were actually majoring in chemistry in college. What was that like being with your college life and then going to your military life?
Well, as you know, as a student, when you're involved in your studies, it can be very time-consuming. But when I went into the military, I found that, of course, someone else was planning my day for me. But I was given every opportunity to do well as if I so decided. In short, I remember during basic training, periodically, as a unit, you would be tested on certain aspects of life. or your background, your schooling would come up, and they wanted to know, do you really know what you say you know? So, so I just stuck with it and tried to um, work well with the military.
With your adaptation to military life and you saying that you were going to be in this new United States Air Force, was there any special training that you had to receive, or any like training that was abnormal for a normal soldier during this time?
I don't think so, not prior to joining, but after joining, I did receive some special training. And it turned out that it was going to dictate what I would be doing in the military. And that is, instead of going to flight school, I was assigned to the medical field, primarily due to my background in sciences.
What was this training like? What did the training entail for you personally?
Say that again?
What was the training like for you? Like, what did the training entail?
Military training?
Yeah, the training that eventually led you to become a medic.
Well, the best way to say it is they gave you on-the-job training, put you in a hospital, give you some duties to do, and see how you like it. Then come to more special opportunities, you get a chance to respond to that. Your promotions are very often based on how you fit in with your new challenge, and I was fortunate in that way.
Did you like your experience with this training, going through the hospital and doing your basic training at that time?
Yes, I did.
But I know specifically you didn't want to be a pilot. So how did that feel for you to become a medic versus like your kind of childhood dream of being a pilot at the time?
Well, when the officer who was interviewing each of us when we were beyond basic training, when he interviewed us and told us what we possibly could do or possibly could not do, he came to me and he said, Jack, I want to let you know that someday you can go to pilot school, but right now we need you in our hospitals. So I thought I'd take that as a compliment and try not to be too disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
It turned out, as I learned later, that there was an overabundance of young men applying for the flight school, so there was going to be a long wait anyhow.
Did you ever have an interest in going back to this flight school later in your service?
I had again, but I kind of put it off.
And then as you later in your military life, where were you stationed and what was your experience there?
Well, after basic training, you're sorted out, and then you get orders to report one place or another. I had along about 50 of my friends were ordered to go to Fort Dix, New Jersey, an Army base. And I guess that should have told me something. It was not a flight school. And we were told that in 1 week time we would be leaving. And all they could tell us at that time was we were going to be with the Northeast Air Command. So right away we started jumping to conclusions, thinking, well, that's cool. Northeast Air Command, that's right up our alley. We'll probably land up in England maybe, or we're on the East Coast, so maybe we'll go to England or Germany because they had bases in those countries. Well, needless to say, we were completely wrong because after a week of preparation, we were put on a merchant marine ship headed out into the North Atlantic, heading north. That was not what I dreamed about in the Air Force, but it's a way of travel that we didn't really enjoy very much because it was in the winter months and the sea was very choppy, high. And if I may say, there were a number of comrades who became ill on board ship. Needless to say, that was not a good experience.
Talking about your life on this ship now, what were like the meals and your daily life like when you were traveling? What did you experience through this time period?
In traveling with the military?
Yeah.
No problems. As long as we reported when we were told to report and be prepared, follow orders, things went well.
And what did you think of like the medical equipment at the time and like basically the medical field that you were in? Was it up to your standards at the time, or what were you expecting there?
I would say for the most part, the equipment was adequate. Tools you were given to use were up to date. And what was happening at the Air Force at that time in the medical field was they were depending a lot of what they learned from the Army and Navy with their training. So when we were assigned to a hospital in one particular place, we had to learn to do with what we were going to do. We were given the opportunity to make suggestions. As non-commissioned officers, you know, we could go to the officer in charge and make recommendations.
Did you ever make any of those recommendations?
I did. My early service was working in a laboratory at a hospital, and sometimes we didn't feel that we were getting enough help as far as adequate material. But as soon as we, no sooner did we suggest this to the officer in charge, then very soon we were given other material to use. So I really couldn't complain overall.
So they were good about what you
They
recommended?
were very good about it.
And was there any experience that stood out to you when you served during this time?
Well, my first assignment in this Northeast Air Command was we ended up in St. John, Newfoundland. There's a nice hospital there. So we thought, well, this would be a good place to serve. Well, we were only there about a month, and some of us were told we were going to go farther north. So that's when we ended up in Goose Bay, Labrador, which is in the northern province. And it's kind of interesting the way life handles you. The first night that we were on duty, we were asked to get together and help a young lady. Well, I shouldn't say young. She appeared to be in her 60s. It turns out she was a local Eskimo lady, and she thought she was coming down with some kind of virus. Turns out she was about to deliver a baby. Well, only 1 out of 5 guys knew what was going on at that moment, but we had quite a story to tell later on. That's how we started at that post.
Talking about that post and what you did there, was it as you expected? Were you like, did you feel as if you were serving and doing what you wanted to do?
Good question. I felt we were treated well. We were given the opportunity to improve on things. But if you go into the history of this base, Goose Bay, Labrador, it was built back in the 40s so that as an air base. And then we were there in the 50s. It hadn't changed a whole lot, but we had to learn to adapt. So we really gave it a go. And as soon as the officer in charge was transferred to another base, we were given a new man in charge. He was more receptive to listening to suggestions. In fact, I had the privilege of being sent back to the States, New York City specifically, for specialized training with the First Army that had a training school in that town. So that was about 4 or 5 weeks. Then I would return to Goose Bay and share what I learned. So that was a good experience.
Talking about that, like, change of leadership and that new leader that you brought in that you personally liked, was there any leader that stood out to you, or any morals or that you saw in a leader that you viewed as crucial?
The sergeant who was in charge of the lab when I landed there was very willing to share his expertise, very willing to keep you posted on life in a small barracks. And so I was fortunate in that way.
Did you ever have any ambitions yourself to become a leader and to move up in the ranks?
Well, I was, yes, I was given opportunities like that. So, and I did manage in the first 2 years to get my first sergeant stripe. So that indicated I was doing pretty well. So.
What did you feel your contributions were as you served? What really affected you, and what did you think, I'm proud of what I did here?
As far as going into the military?
Yeah, your experiences in the military, and what kind of made you proud for your service?
Well, in the medical field, there's a lot of opportunities to help your fellow man or woman, and that makes you proud that you can serve in that way. But also in other ways, as you're working with a total team, whether you're with medics or not, you could be on the flight line doing your job, but everybody learned to cooperate and work as a team. There was no excuse for not doing a job.
You talk about the idea of being able to help your fellow man and woman. Is there any specific instance where this really stood out to you, that you were able to say that you really felt your contribution towards that person?
I would say so. You never know from one day to the next who you might meet, especially in the medical corps. People are transferred in and out quite a bit. So if you can learn to share or give an example of good duty, there are rewards. The rewards are not necessarily financial, but there are rewards of learning that you can cooperate, you can work with the best, and you can make a good contribution to your country.
That contribution that you found seems to really affect your view on life, and when you went home after you became a teacher yourself, was that out of the view of still wanting to help others and make a contribution on their lives?
Very definitely.
What effects did the military have on you that helped affect teaching the younger generation today?
Well, I think as a rookie teacher in the later years, I learned a lot from my father-in-law, who was a teacher of over 30 years at that time. He convinced me to give teaching a try. I tried other duties. So I did, and I fell in love with it. Ended up teaching for over 35 years myself. So.
When you first came home and were about to become a teacher, you mentioned previously that you weren't received in the best manner on your return home. Could you talk about this?
Well, you know, the country had been involved in a war for many, many years, starting with World War II more specifically. And here World War II is coming to a close, theoretically. And all of a sudden now we got problems in Korea. And the country as a whole, I think, was tired of war. And so when you were on leave or came home or after you did your duty, people didn't necessarily throw out their arms to welcome you back. You know, some did, some did not. So in my case, when I was discharged, I ended up hanging my uniform in a closet and tried to adapt to my new way of life.
But that contribution you mentioned earlier that you really felt that helped shape you into becoming a great teacher, the outlook that people put on you, that did not affect what you thought of your experience, or did it?
Well, you can always look back at what happened or what didn't happen, but I think the way the way things were going well for me in teaching. It's due partly to my experience as being an older person and mature, if I may say so. Different people would give you different answers to that when they talk about Jack Eleyet, but I'm not sure whether it's all good or not.
And your life lessons that you really learned in the military, what are a few that stood out to you that you view as crucial to teach the people of tomorrow and to just teach maybe your students as well?
Well, in the military, the military taught you how to cooperate with others and do it in a positive way. So in a civil situation, non-military, you have a similar opportunity that you can fall back on your experience in the military to help you decide what to do and what not to do.
And going back to talking about your military life in general, how is this lesson implemented for you in the training you received and the experiences you went through?
How did my training affect?
How did you what training and experiences did you receive that really helped shape this kind of lesson for you and how you see it for yourself?
Yes, I believe the training that I was given in the military certainly gave me an advantage in the civilian life in many instances. Case in point, before I was discharged from the military, my wife and I were married, and we learned how to live properly and in a positive way, despite what the military said. The military, I was still under orders, so, I could be told to do something one day that didn't fit into my schedule, but we learned to adapt.
So I know military life is going to take a drastic toll, and not just you, definitely, but your wife as well. Did you see any conflicts or any problems with that military life really caused to your wife or your family in general?
I don't think so.
So it was pretty easy for them to adapt with your service and your life in the military?
My wife's family would have been, they weren't too I should restate it. They weren't too excited about my wife and I getting married at the time. They wanted us to wait till after I got out of the service. But they learned, and we learned to adapt. And I think the experience that I had in the military helped me act in a more mature way.
And this adaptation, was this seen in you had a college life before you went into the military, which was pretty rigorous and was kind of straightforward. But when you went into the military, is that when you truly learned to adapt to all the different scenarios that life gives you?
The military gives you many different examples. I think when I think back to some of the experiences in the military, it seems to be that if we listened to the authority and practiced what we were told to do, then we would be okay. We wouldn't always like it. We didn't always like what we were told or what to do, but if we did, most cases, those in charge were correct in most cases.
And though you say those in charge were correct, so you never had a problem yourself with any leadership or any of the rules the military kind of gave you? You were appreciative of everything that was kind of happening throughout your service?
I think so.
And was there any experience that you really viewed that kind of changed who you were before you went into the military. You talk about your goals of becoming a pilot, and then you said you were happy to be a medic in a way, and you were glad that the military helped you become a teacher. But was there anything that changed your outlook on life or changed who you really were before you went in?
I think before the military, I was kind of a self-appointed geek, in a sense, and I had my own way of doing things. And although I had friends and so forth, but I was still wasn't the easiest guy to get along with. The military taught me to get along right from the first day, so that was a benefit. I fall back on that quite often. You know, if I may mention, when I was in Labrador, that was one extreme condition for living. We get concerned today, for example, of snow in April. Well, in Labrador, we had snow all the time, most times. Then I was transferred to Memphis, Tennessee, so I went from a cold spot to a warm spot. And at Memphis, the organization had been pretty much leaning toward the Navy. The Navy had been using Memphis as a training post for quite a few years. So we moved in and kind of took over, in a sense, in a nice way, military-wise. And one of the first people I met was a master sergeant who was in charge of supplies. We learned, you know, in the military, if there's something you need or want, you want to be on the good side of the supply sergeant. So I met, his office was very close to my place of work, the laboratory. So I got a chance to meet him right away. And I said, well, Sergeant, how's the things going? And what is your name? He said, my name is Quattlebaum. Quattlebaum, that's an interesting name. He said, well, that's only part of it. My first name is Buell, and my middle name is Birdie. Buell, Birdie, Quattlebaum. That was my first experience with this gentleman, who was from Arkansas and who turned out to be one of my best friends. Just a sidelight, but I thought I'd throw that in.
So that experience really taught you that going into the military, you meet people and you meet circumstances that you never expected to see before, but those really helped you change your life for the better, and you met people that you became friends with that you never would have before.
That's correct. Good way to put it.
And I know we're running kind of short on time now and we don't have a lot of questions left, but I would like to ask you, like, is there anything you look back in the past in the military or any choice you made that you would go back and change again? Or is there anything that you would say, I would do this again no matter what?
You know, I was thinking the other day if I had re-enlisted, which I had always had that opportunity, I had to make a decision at the time, either re-enlist or apply for early leave. At that time, they had the opportunity to apply for early discharge to attend school. So you needed certification from the school that you're going to attend, and then you might, for example, in my case, I was discharged 13 days before I was scheduled to be discharged. But it gave me a chance to get into a school right away that fall. So there were some benefits, and I think the benefits were related to my background and my history.
Is there anything else that you would like to say about your military life or your overall, your experience that you went through that you feel is important that we haven't covered yet?
I do not feel badly about my military experience. It was good for me. I don't hesitate to say otherwise.
In closing, this has been an interview of Jack Eleyet regarding his service during the Korean War. My name is Andrew DeMaster. The time is 5:32. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, and most importantly, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job.
Um, is there anything that you feel that that the military did for your life that wouldn't have been covered if you just chose a life of going to college and becoming a teacher straight after?
I think it taught me to be aware of other people, and if I can be of any service to them, I should do so. And that turns out that was a strong basis for my wife's life also.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and thank you for your service, and I see you have the honor flight jacket as well.
Yes.
What was your experience with the honor flight, or what really stood out to you with that?
It was great, starting at 5 o'clock in the morning and getting back to 10 or 11 that same day. But it meet a lot of your fellow countrymen that served also with you, or those that mostly met new ones. It was a great honor, great honor. As I mentioned earlier, when I got out of the service, I just put the uniform in the closet and we went about my business. But this particular activity is a great opportunity for the country to show respect to their veterans, and likewise the other way around. It was great.
It's a great experience, and I'm
Great
glad
experience.
you got to experience that for yourself.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.